Small ministry doesn't have to mean small impact. We're talking about that now on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu.
That's me.
All right, A.J. So I think a common challenge that we hear when we're working with ministries across the globe is this sense that it's some maybe misconceptions about size. Everybody's maybe like a really self-conscious about how large or how small their church is. And so today on the podcast, what we really want to talk about, first, I kind of want to talk about just the myth of the relevance of size. Like size is not an inherently good or bad thing. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about, I want to especially talk to, not if you're listening to us and you're from a larger organization or a larger church, this is still for you. You're going to find a lot in this that I think will encourage you. But I especially want to speak to those leaders of smaller ministries who maybe sometimes feel like they're less than or can't make a big impact. And so we want to encourage you today with some things. And then also we have kind of a special announcement that we've got for you today towards the end, kind of the latter half of this episode. So please stay tuned till the very end for us to dive into that announcement. So did I miss anything by way of sort of introducing where
Sounds
we're
like
going?
a good setup.
Okay. All right. So let's start. I want to just start by talking about this idea that size is neutral. There's a few different aspects to this. First, big churches sometimes assume, and I've worked on staff in larger churches, and the assumption is, well, we're just more effective. Like clearly we have good processes, we have good systems in place, we have resources in place, we have people in place. And so they're not that they don't have problems. They recognize, I mean, every organization has problems, but they're like, we're more effective than, Back Road Baptist Church down the street.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side of that, I hear some smaller churches almost kind of be like, well, we're more holy. We're not that big production. We're not the lights in the show. And so because we are small, we're inherently better.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hear the knock on the big churches. Well, the big churches, they're a production, they're a show, they're shallow. They're good at making disciples, but they're not good at maturing disciples. And then you hear the knock on the small churches that they're intransigent and they're kind of just more of a country club. They maybe are making maturing disciples, but they're not evangelistic at all. They're not making disciples. And I think that all of it, AJ, is just a big bunch of nonsense. Size is totally
Yeah.
irrelevant. What
All of
matters
those
is, yeah, go ahead.
things can be true or not
Yeah,
true. They are true and they're not true of various churches around the world.
right, right. There are large churches that are shallow.
Yeah.
There are small churches that are shallow.
Yeah.
There are large churches that are really good at making and maturing disciples. There are
Mm-hmm.
small churches that are really good at making and maturing disciples. So the size of the church is neutral. What matters is health, church health,
Right.
which from our perspective, and we believe it's a biblical perspective, is measured by the degree of commitment and faithfulness to a Great Commission mission of
Mm-hmm.
making and maturing disciples. And size has no bearing on that.
That's right.
It will look different depending on the size you are and the location that you are and all of those things. But you can be really effective in that mission no matter what size you are. And if you aren't living out that mission, you are ineffective and fruitless from a biblical perspective, regardless of how many members you have.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. I think the bottom line is health scales. And no matter what size you are, if you're healthy, you may not have the numeric impact that a larger church of equal health would have, but from a percentage standpoint, I guess, unequal or possibly greater impact. So
Right. So
health
we would just
scales.
say, yeah, size is neutral.
Hmm.
What matters is health.
Yep.
And it scales up and it scales down proportionately.
Yeah.
Um, However, so that's sort of like that's almost like our preface caveat going, size is neutral, but we want to speak a little bit to those smaller ministries and encourage you in some really specific ways. So let's dive into that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what? I've been trying to think of some examples too, and you probably have got some churches in mind as well. So I mean, I can think of a large church that a very wealthy church that I don't see that has very they definitely do not have the percentage scaled local impact that you would expect or want them to have. Pretty decent global impact because money is easy to give away when you have it.
Mhm.
So we have got that on one hand, and then I can think of another church that has grown significantly. They're not a mega church. They've grown significantly though. They're actually here in my local area, and they started off very small country church that I've known for probably close to 25 years now. And they started a local ministry, a food bank that has grown so ridiculously large. They've got mile long line of cars for groceries. And I think they do it twice a month. I'm not sure, but they ended up having to get a really large warehouse. They were getting huge amounts of food donated and were serving a lot of low income families, rural low
Mhm.
income families.
Yeah.
Um, and they were focusing on their outreach more than they were focusing on growing their church. And their church naturally grew because of their mindset of bringing the gospel to people and meeting a physical need. And
Mhm.
and so, yeah, God does choose to use a small church in a significant way, and you can have a significant impact. Um, so yeah, there was just a couple of illustrations or examples of what we were kind of setting up.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first point I wanted to make to encourage you if you're a smaller ministry is that God often chooses to use the small to shame the powerful.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think he does this because when you are a small ministry or a small organization or a small church and you make this outsized impact, you can't take any of the credit.
Yeah.
You can't take any of the glory. You can't say, well, here are the five sort of silver bullet things that you need to do to optimize your ministry and maximize your impact. Like you can't do that. God gets all the glory. And so, kind of as a backdrop to this topic, we want to use the story of Gideon. So, specifically, Gideon, in Judges chapter 7, rather.
Mhm.
Gideon himself is the lowest member of the lowest family in the lowest tribe
Mm.
of Israel. So Gideon himself is the last person that God should have elevated to be a judge and to lead his people because he was the least of the least of the least, the least
Mm.
person in the least family in the least tribe. And so God does though call him and elevate him, and he has to confirm this. He does the whole fleece thing to be like, really, me? Are you sure? He double confirms, and then he goes and he raises up this army because they've got this vast Midianite force, tens of thousands of people
Hmm.
in this army. And God says, I want you to winnow down the volunteers all the way till he has just 300 men left in this army. And so now here you have the least of the least of the least with the tiniest army
Yeah.
possible that God
Hmm.
himself has hand selected and to send them out to defeat this vast force. And it's just a reminder that God doesn't just happen to use small groups like because he couldn't find some others. He intentionally winnows down a larger group to the smaller group
Yeah.
so that he can get all of the glory.
Yep.
And so God uses the small things, the lesser things of this world to shame the powerful and to give himself all
Hmm.
the glory. And so I think that this applies to churches as well. I want to, again, just reiterate, you aren't inherently better just because you're small. At the same time, recognize that your smallness is not a disadvantage to you. You can go, you should never say the words, I can't
Yeah.
or we can't,
Hmm.
just because your ministry is small. If God can do amazing things and has consistently done amazing things, and his preferred choice for doing amazing things is often the small things, then you should never say, we can't do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of common aspects to that. First of all, is the reliance on God, and the understanding of His power being the enabling power. So I
Hmm.
think when people's hearts are aligned that way, and then seeking His will and being in alignment with His will. So calling on His power to accomplish His will, I think, is where the numbers game goes out the window.
Right.
Um, so I think those are the two necessary elements. I think if either one of those are missing, then you may not find that success. But when we're aligned with the things that God wants to accomplish, and we trust in Him to be the force that can make that happen, then I think we see Him show up. And
Yeah.
there's numerous examples of that in the Bible, from David, Goliath, to this one in Judges, um, and throughout the New Testament. Um,
Right.
so
I
yeah.
think one thing too, just kind of as a practical point I want to make is that sometimes churches, smaller churches, create their own obstacles, like they're their own worst enemies, you know,
Mhm.
and so you've got the bureaucracy. I mean, one of your tactical advantages of being a small organization is that you shouldn't have a large bureaucracy.
True.
You should be able to like move lean and quick and be able to just make decisions and do things. But if you are behaving like an organization that has 50,000 people, you know, because you have 18 different committees and it's got to go through all of these steps and processes in order to get anything done or to make a decision, or
Hmm.
we have to get consensus on every small thing before we move forward. Like you are putting up all of these totally unnecessary roadblocks. Not that checks and balances aren't good and some level of processes aren't good. Of course, that's good. But
Hmm.
your advantage is that you're small and you can just do things.
Yeah.
And if you have built up 100 years worth of red tape, you maybe first need to clear some of that stuff out of the way so that you aren't setting yourself up for stepping on rakes, you know, every time you turn around.
Yeah.
Um, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Uh,
those committee processes, what we see happening is that there is no stated mission and vision, or there's not a unified mission and vision. So people have ideas, they begin to go to committees. Committees have their own ideas. Like, this doesn't really align with what we think the church should be doing. And maybe it gets a no, maybe it gets a partial yes, maybe it just gets slowed down so that some other group can go through the same process. Does this align with what our committee thinks we should be doing?
yeah,
Instead of working together for a common goal, which is where things then can instead be checked. Like, we understand what the mission and vision are. Our committee will check it, make sure that that's good alignment, and then say yes so that we can move forward quickly. So that's how that's how we see the church bureaucracy work when there isn't unity in aligning itself with what God's will is.
right. So just to recap where we've gone so far, number one, size is neutral. Number two, God chooses to use the small things of the world to shame the powerful. Like that it's
Yeah.
his often, I don't want to say always, but it's often his preferred method for getting things done is to use the small. The third thing I want to say on this is everything that is significant started small.
Hmm.
You can't name a single movement in the Old Testament, you know, like even just the people of it, the nation of Israel started with one family, you know, from one man, Abraham, who had one son. And I one chosen son. I guess he had two sons, but he had the chosen line in Isaac. And so there's no major thing that ever it was just born, fully developed, and whole and done.
Hmm.
So as you look at the thing that you have or the thing that you are today, don't look have a have a bigger lens. Like have a future focused lens that goes, this can be something greater than it is today, and it can extend beyond my timeline. One of the things that I just to kind of peek ahead to, if I ever happen to work with your church, I'm going to pull you to Haggai chapter 2, and I'm going to pull you to the promise that the Lord makes to his people through the prophet Haggai, that the latter glory of this house will be greater than the former. And speaking of the temple that they were being called to rebuild. And I always like to point to that the ultimate fulfillment of this promise is the church today and the whole world,
Hmm.
being filled with the glory of God through his people.
Hmm.
And that's far greater than anything Solomon ever built. And so it would have been impossible in that moment for Zerubbabel to have heard this promise and known the ultimate fulfillment. So I just want to encourage you and say, have a bigger lens. Don't just think a year out or 5 years out or even 10 years out. Think what impact can extend beyond my timeline and the great thing that can happen. So just some examples of this. You have Jesus has this wonderful ministry, earthly ministry in 3.5 years. And what's left of that when he ascends into heaven is an upper room filled with 120, which immediately grows to 3,000 at Pentecost, and then obviously it grows from there. But it starts with 120 in an upper room.
Hmm.
That's it. Yeah, when Jesus ascends, that's it. It's just the 120.
Yeah.
Some more recent examples. You could think of Methodism, being started with just John Wesley, or you can think of the Salvation Army, which is now a global organization, started really small. All of these things, all these great movements of the faith, or even Patrick. I love St. Patrick. St. Patrick starts at age 40, planting churches in Ireland, and the whole nation is converted the majority conversion within a generation. All of these things happened with a small, dedicated band of people who were mission focused
Hmm.
on making and maturing disciples. And God often chooses the small to shame the powerful, and everything that is eternally significant like this started small.
Yeah. Amen. I mean, of course, we see this in the business world all the time too. Those garage startups that end up
Sure.
producing, creating things like the iPhone. So, uh, yeah, I mean, nothing starts off gigantic. No matter how much money you have, you do not launch on day one with a huge organization. Um, and
Or
if
even
you
think about
do,
the human body. It starts with two cells. That's
yeah,
it. You
yeah.
know what I mean? Like you are this amazing complex organism.
Hmm.
You didn't start that way. Like you had to develop.
Yeah,
And even once you were born, you don't come out like an adult. That would be
yeah,
weird.
yeah,
And
yeah.
even
Even
once you stop physically growing, you continue to grow. Like it takes time.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. The poor decision-making young men whose frontal cortex isn't developed until age 25 even. Yes. I know a couple of those pretty
Yeah, I was
well.
gonna say, well, I won't say anything on this podcast, but I know you're
Some of
dealing
those
with it. I'm
some of
dealing with
those
it too
guys
with my
live really, really close to me. Um, so, yeah, yeah. I think this is a great picture of the church, and I hope this is an encouragement to you small church pastors, um, and maybe even to you large church pastors who maybe you're thinking, you know what, are we really utilizing well the resources that we've been blessed with already? Um,
yeah.
because I think God does want us to scale when He blesses us with the resources to scale, people, money, facilities. I think we are supposed to lean into that. We're not supposed to sit back. God's not just handing out rewards, earthly rewards for no good reason.
Right.
I mean, there's work expected to be done. I mean, we're all in this together. The global church as one. as the body of Christ, accomplishing God's will on earth. It's his plan. This is his plan A, and it's the only plan there is. How is the
Yeah.
gospel going to get to the ends of the earth? Through the church, through every
Right.
believer called to the same mission, and working together. We should be building each other up. We should be supporting each other. We should be maximizing our resources and our opportunities every day for the cause of the gospel.
Right. All right. So this is where we want to transition a bit and just share with you, we're trying to encourage you. We're also trying to preach this message to ourselves because you may not know this, but the Malfers Group, and we operate internationally as Healthy Churches Global. We're not a large organization. In fact, one of the things that when I first started working with the Malfers Group team back in 2016, one of the terms that got thrown around was we're a boutique firm.
Mm,
We're a boutique firm that works with churches. And I was so like deeply kind of offended by that terminology. It rubbed me such the wrong way because I'm like, we're not selling dresses. Like, we're not, and we're not even selling a product. Like that wasn't even who I thought we were.
hmm
I'm like, aren't we taking on the problem of global church decline? Like, isn't that this is not a boutique problem? It doesn't need a boutique solution. It's a global challenge that requires globally minded people to
hmm
tackle this global problem. Needs global solutions.
Yeah.
And so, but we're a small, lean group. So if you're watching this podcast on YouTube or listening in your car, you're listening to the two people who run this organization full time. We have a team of 20 some odd other guides that are certified in our process, almost 30 um, certified in our process that work with churches domestically and internationally. But in terms of running the organization, you see us.
This is the
We have other people.
100% of the full-time staff right here.
Yeah, you're looking right at them. And so we have now more challenges, more requests for help, more opportunities to serve churches than we have the capability to handle ourselves. And so um, we're on the one hand like overjoyed because we've been building towards this. We've been trying to build an international ministry that's making an impact on every corner of the globe, and we're doing that. And if you had said 5 years ago, hey, you're going to be serving churches in Europe and South America and Central America and Asia and Africa, we would have been like, no, we're not. We don't have the ability to do that. We don't have the resources to do that. We don't have any of that. And here we are today. We look and we go, well, we still don't have the resources, but somehow we're doing this.
Yeah.
It's like that Michael Scott book that he wrote in The Office, Somehow I Manage. Um, and I always think about that. I'm like, yeah, somehow God does this. And
Yeah.
but at the same time, we know that God is calling us to more, and we also know we have an army. We
hmm
have an army of you who listen to this podcast every single week. Some of you maybe don't listen every week. You listen some weeks and not other weeks, depending on how interesting you think it is. But there are some few thousand of you who listen to this podcast regularly. Some, I don't know, 11 to 12,000 of you who read our emails and engage with us on some level. And we're looking for 300 of you of the several thousand of you who are engaged with us on some level. We're looking for 300 of you, individuals or churches,
hmm
to join our army of sorts, who are Gideon's army of like-minded people who see the problem of church decline and recognize that we need a global church revitalization solution.
hmm
And we're looking for 300 churches or individuals who are willing to invest $100 a month in this ministry to help us tackle this problem. It's not a boutique problem, it's a global problem. It doesn't
hmm
need a boutique solution, it requires a global solution.
hmm
And so these 300 individuals or churches, and so just think of that. That's like we're asking for $1,200 from your missions budget. So even if you're a particularly small church, we're hoping that that's something that might be feasible if you believe in this cause. What that does is help us live out our strategy. And our strategy is simple. It's three things. We make, promote, and deliver proven digital church revitalization training and tools. This podcast is one of those things, but it's not the extent of those things. We have you know hours worth of revitalization content. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of tools, templates, and training materials that we make available online. And we need to be able to promote those things and deliver them. We also need the ability to translate them into more and more languages.
That's a big one.
So,
Yeah.
so right now we can deliver them in English and in Spanish, but we want to be able to deliver these things in every major language. But that costs money. And then we also need to be able to, people need to know that it exists. A lot. That's one of the big things we hear from our global partners is, this is really great. I wish I had known earlier that this exists. And like you who are here in North America, we're filling a gap that seminaries don't fill. So while all of our stuff is biblically based and rich in theology, it's not how to write a sermon. It's how to lead a church. It's a different kind of a thing than what most seminaries are doing. So we need to make, promote, and deliver proven digital church revitalization training and tools. The second thing that we do is we identify and deploy regional church revitalization guides. So right now, we most have this built out in Europe. We have 3 guides trained in Europe who are able to work with churches in Europe at a much lower cost than if we were to go. We still sometimes go, in particular to help train up some of these guides and to fill in some gaps. But the dream is to have those guides fully mobilized and deployed and working, because it's a lot less expensive to send them than to send us.
Yeah.
And we'd like to replicate that in more places around the globe.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just meet on Zoom a few times and they're ready to go. It requires working with them one-on-one and in person a few times for them to get a hang of it and to get them deployed. The third thing is that we develop partnerships with established networks of global churches. So right now we have relationships with the International Baptist Convention. We have a relationship with the Missional International Church Network. We'd love to build more partnerships like this, where we are their go-to partner for church health and revitalization work. So they have churches, and those churches need revitalization. They maybe don't have the resources or the tools or good processes to help those churches become healthy. We have that. So let us be the partner in those instances, rather than us trying to go out and find individual congregations. We love working with a whole network of churches so that we can deploy those relationships. So lots of times when you see AJ and I maybe go to a certain place, we're going to a conference, not just to hang out, but to build those relationships with 40, 50, 60 different churches that are a part of a network. And then we're able to serve those churches through that network.
Yeah.
So
although those trips also, we don't even go on those trips unless we're able to teach while we're there.
Sure. Yeah.
Bring
That's
training.
a good point.
Yeah.
But I guess I just wanted to say, hey, we're not just going even just to lead a training. It's to establish long-term partnerships and relationships with these networks of churches,
Mm-hmm.
which, over time pay dividends. So like, even just this week, you're going to be traveling. I won't say where. I never love announcing on the podcast where you're going and at what time, but you're going to be traveling this week to work with a church overseas, and that's through that relationship that we have through the network. So that's our strategy. It's the digital training and tools, which is a stopgap measure before we can send an in-person person, to identify, train, deploy regional revitalization guides, and to develop partnership relationships with established networks of global churches. And it's a strategy that's quite frankly working.
Yeah.
And so a team of 300 individuals or churches that are willing to support what we're doing at $100 a month, which is not a massive request. It's significant. I don't want to say, oh, well, that's nothing, but I think maybe a reasonable request. For us, it's game changing. It allows us to meet every open need we have right now. There's not one church that's asking for help right now that we wouldn't be able to serve if we had our army of 300
Mm-hmm.
and then some.
Yeah.
It opens up additional capability for us.
Yeah, which kind of want to tag in on that as a built out organization with our funding, that doesn't only extend beyond the United States. So here in the US, or in North America, I should say, churches pay one of the smallest fees of any organization operating in this space right now, for us to work with them. And a portion of that goes into what allows our international work as well, in addition to donors. Um, but we don't want any church in the United States or Canada also to not get the resources that they need. And so with your partnership, we can extend the opportunity then to churches closer to home as well. Small, struggling churches with a strong desire, a heartfelt desire to be healthy and make an impact. Then we can say yes to more of those also. So
That's right.
we go to the ends of the earth, but we also come back to the Jerusalems of our space as well, and be able to make that impact. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, let me add on just a little bit, kind of a more on a personal note. Let's tell you a little bit about how this organization has changed. I mean, I started at the end of 2014 with the Malfers Group. In 2016 or 17, just part of our own internal strategy process, we developed vision statements, vision that we had for the organization. Um, and I wrote down a vision of us being a global organization. I described having guides in different places around the world. But let me tell you who I was at the time that was written. I did not see me actually being a part of that. I saw me being a part of the United States work, not outside the United States, though I saw that for our organization. But in 2018, I went on my first international mission trip, when my pastor invited me to go do some teaching in Africa. And it was absolutely life changing. And from that time, I said I will go. I think pretty much anywhere. I'm not willing to say 100% of any place on earth I would say yes to, but pretty darn close. I think the list is shorter of the places I would say, oh, I don't know about that, than the list of places I would say yes to. With a desire to do that, with a desire to go, and then God made that happen. I mean, it was still 3 years later before we had our first opportunity to do that. And then COVID happened, and we had to cancel that and do it remotely. But in 2021, the vision finally started. And again, because of relationships and partnerships, and it's just grown exponentially. To the tune now of me being somewhere outside the United States pretty much once a month, for at least 7 days or longer. So, and it's phenomenal. It's amazing to see the work that God is doing. And so I just want to, I mean, take a minute and just, put that out there, that God did a change in me. That I was the guy that was like, I'm never leaving the United States. This is the greatest country on earth. I don't need to go anywhere, to now saying, send me. And, and, and I'm asking you to send us. And you can be a part of that. Um, and I think it's a reasonable financial ask for most churches, not everybody, but doesn't have to be that much either. I mean, you can put in a lesser amount and still make an impact. But we're asking for you to send us. We've got the team ready to go. We need you to join the army, to be a part of Gideon's army in this space, and help us make this happen. We've been doing this a long time. We've been doing it on a very, very small budget for a long time. And the asks continue to grow, and we want to keep saying yes. And so
Yeah.
we're asking you to send us.
Our motivations are not financial. AJ and I have done a lot of this work for $0 personally. You know, we've got families to feed, so we hope to be able to do that. But we have, people will say, "Oh, I would do this work for free." We've done it for free, and at personal cost to ourselves. Just ask our wives. So that's not our incentive, and we've always kind of hated to bring up. We've mentioned, hey, go to malfersgroup.com/donate. We say it at almost every episode. But this is maybe one of the very few times we've made a very specific request. And we're praying that there are 300 of you who go, all right, not as a favor to Scott Ball or to AJ Mathieu personally, But because you believe that church decline is a global problem, that it requires a global solution. And if you've been blessed by our resources to the point where you go, hey, I trust that the work they're doing is solid and it's leading churches to be healthy, Great Commission focused churches. If you believe in that, we're asking 300 of you to join Operation Gideon. We call it Operation Gideon. And either you individually or your church's missions budget to support the cause of global church revitalization at $100 a month. So you can learn more about that at malfirstgroup.com/donate or malfirstgroup.com/Gideon. We'll take you all to that same page. Also, today's show notes, malfirstgroup.com/238, will take you to an article about all the things we talked about, the importance of God choosing the small things to shame the powerful. But there's also information about Operation Gideon and a form there to participate in that if you choose to. We're believing God. We're trusting the Lord. We're kind of standing like Gideon, going, "Us, really? Will you do this?" And trusting that He will, that He's called us to this work, and that He'll provide the resources that are necessary to do the thing that we know He's called us to do. So, thank you in advance for those of you who say yes and join us, and know that you're not just sending $100 a month. Like, you are changing churches across this globe, and that spreads. It spreads. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. We love you guys. We love serving you. We want to see you serving one another. And we want to see you believing that God can make a difference in your church locally and globally. And we're going to be back here again next week. We're going to keep doing this week after week after week. We're not going to take up this much of your time talking about this week after week. We're going to just be back trying to help you build your church.
Yeah.
But you can count on us being here. We have no plans to go away. We will have no plans to let the enemy defeat this ministry. We are going to persevere, and we're trusting God for the resources to do that. And we want to celebrate with you when we count off number 300 as well. I don't know what that celebration is going to look like. It's going to be big. I can tell you that. We're going to be excited. All right. Hey, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.